borrow this? Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I'm the director curator at the School of Art Gallery. And nice to see your faces. And hello to the folks on Zoom as well, and YouTube. On behalf of the gallery, I'm just really pleased to welcome you all to today's talk by Lillian O'Brien Davis and Erika DeFreitas. This talk is presented in conjunction with the exhibition, The Performance of Shadows, which is curated by Lillian and features Erika's work along with work by Betty Saar and Tim Whiten. And it's on exhibit at the School of Art Gallery downstairs until April 29th. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on Treaty 1 territory. The Anishinaabe, Nehiyaw, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene people were the original stewards of this land. And the Red River, which runs through present-day Winnipeg, is the heartland and birthplace of the Métis Nation. Treaty 1 was signed here at Lower Fort Garry in 1871, and it took territory from 7 Anishinaabe and Nehiyaw First Nations to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Our water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, which only last year ended its own boil water advisories. The Performance of Shadows is about, among many other things, alternate ways of knowing, of trusting intuition, sensing, and feeling. It's about experiential and embodied ways of knowing that can provide tremendous value and insight and are not always easily aligned with or incorporated into institutional systems and structures. We know that institutions like ours are deeply rooted in colonialism, and we know that they privilege white, Eurocentric, and empirical ways of knowing and being and teaching and learning. Can we imagine a radically expansive and decolonial future that honors and benefits from a diversity of spiritual, pedagogical, and epistemological perspectives? And through this lens, I want to affirm the gallery's commitment to working together in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration so that we might bring that future closer to the present. Before I turn it over, a little bit of preamble and thank yous. The Performance of Shadows is the second exhibition that is part of the School of Art Gallery's Visiting Curator program. This is a really exciting and ambitious multi-year project that has invited 3 visiting curators, Grace Devaney, Lillian O'Brien Davis, and Shalaka Jadhav, each to research, develop, and present a major exhibition, an ambitious slate of outreach programming, and publications here at the University of Manitoba. The program aims to play a vital role in defining contemporary art and its attendant discourses in the prairies, and is offering many opportunities for students, faculty, and community members alike to engage with curators and artists who are charting bold new trajectories in the field. I want to thank and name the program's mentor, Grace Devaney, who has really been, I think, the perfect person to create this new framework with. We've all really benefited tremendously from her intelligence and insight, and her generosity and kindness. The Visiting Curator program is generously supported by Michael F.B. Nesbitt, who is a real champion of the arts throughout Winnipeg and beyond, and we are beyond grateful for his vision, support, and trust. I also want to acknowledge that the work that we do would not be possible without generous support of the University of Manitoba, the School of Arts, amazing faculty, staff, donors, and volunteers. They all support our programming and make it possible. I would also like to thank the folks at ECHO who are providing ASL interpretation to make today's panel more accessible, or this panel of 2. And to big thanks to School of Art staff member Justin Baer for his assistance in facilitating this talk. Thank you, Justin. If anybody is having trouble over on Zoom or YouTube, you can direct message the School of Art Gallery account, and Justin will do his best to help you out. And subsequently, if you're watching on YouTube and you have a question, you can post it over there, and we'll relay it. He will relay it to our speakers. Same goes for YouTube comment function. Finally, I would like to thank our fantastic guests, Erika DeFreitas and Lillian O'Brien Davis, who have both been incredibly generous and lovely to work with. Their respective practices are subtle and elegant, really rich and nuanced, both intellectually rigorous but also beautifully guided by their intuition and ways of knowing that kind of transcend the logic of the mind. They've also been both very generous with their time, visiting with classes and students, offering studio visits, and both giving and receiving insights from others. And it's been really, really gratifying, and like from the bottom of my heart, I mean it, to work with you and share a space with you. So I know that we're all really in for a really fascinating and engaging talk. Thank you both.
Thanks, Blair. Yeah, sort of melancholy to imagine that the show is sort of on its way towards closing at the end of April, but I'm kind of reassured that I can still continue to work with Blair for the rest of this program. So Blair is a really wonderful curator and mentor as well. Hi, Erika.
Hi, Lily.
This is a dream come true in like many ways. So thank you so much for joining us. So Erika and I first connected with Erika in 2018 when I was doing my master's, and and we met and had a great first meeting, and I shared with you like what I was doing with for my master's research, and I feel like you were so kind to me, and it was sort of this immediate connection where I could really share and like speak what was on my mind, and you heard me, and you were generous enough to let me include your work of relations and positions in my master's thesis exhibition. So our relationship sort of started 5 years ago, I suppose.
It feels longer.
Yeah, it feels like longer. And you've been very, very generous and kind. And I've thought about your work very often since then. So this show sort of began with Erika and our relationship and grew into what you see downstairs. And hopefully there will be sort of like a future for it as well. So one of the things I wanted to open our conversation with is a conversation about relationships, because 2 years ago I was living in Regina, and it was locked down. I was alone. I had friends, but I didn't know that many people. It was sort of like a very lonely period for me. And we took to speaking on the phone, and there were several phone calls that we had, and I was so kind of grateful for them, because not only were they like friendship conversations, but they were also conversations about art, and I was really hungry for that. And you shared, video, like links to some of the video work that you were working on, and other access that was so beyond what a young curator might expect. And specifically, you were telling me about your work Arrivé avant moi, devant moi, which, Justin, do you mind flipping to those slides? Which is a beautiful series that I hope you'll tell us a little bit about. But I ended up writing about this series for Peripheral Review. And so this also was the genesis for the exhibition, which we'll talk about. But I want to talk about sort of like curator-artist relationships and the kind of reciprocity that can exist within them. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know that you sort of have built these relationships. So I guess I want to open here and sort of see what you think, or how you've been thinking about this process as well.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the opportunities to work with these curators who are amazing human beings, and who really put art and the artists at the forefront of their work, which is really important for us as artists. But it is a relationship that is reciprocated, and sometimes it's really unexpected, the wonderful relationships that get developed, and they're never short-lived. They're usually over a longer period of time. And just like our conversations helped you in some way, they really fed me in many ways. And I find that the relationships that I have with other curators do very similar things, So, for example, the work that you mentioned that we talked about over the COVID period, Emily McKibben, a curator who's now at the Windsor Art Gallery, was the one who told me about Jean and planted that seed. And, you know, I continued to do my research from there and created that series of photographs from that. And then when we talked, you talked about the witch's kit that you found out about, which was completely fascinating for me. And so it was just, you know, a sharing that happens, which is really fruitful for both sides, I think.
Yeah, it's something that I've been, I think about a lot in my practice. I think because I've always felt like very green, and I think I'm sort of exiting that era of my career, but I still kind of carry that with me. And so I think a lot of the artists, or I know that a lot of the artists that I've been working with the last couple of years tend to have more kind of experience or shows under their belt than I do. And so thinking about kind of traditionally a curator would come in and sort of be like, oh, I'm having these thoughts, or I would like to I'm proposing these things, and that it would be potentially unidirectional. But I think in the case of our relationship and many of the artist relationships that I've been privileged to have, it's very reciprocal, where the mentorship is I mean, I feel like I'm being mentored by artists. And so I think it's really influenced how my curatorial practice has grown, because I feel like I think of myself not as an artist, of course, but it's sort of as I don't know, a comrade or something.
Well, a collaborator. Like, I really do believe that when I feel a show is successful when I get to collaborate with a curator and we're both feeding off of our energy, because the work becomes something new once it leaves the studio and enters the space where it's going to be absorbed by others. And, you know, that takes both of us figuring that out. Mostly you.
Not at all.
Yeah. But, you know, that there's a conversation that goes deeper into the work, because it's really important to know the relationship of works with each other in a space. And, you know, we learn from each other in that way. And learn from the work, too, because it speaks to us differently when it's in a space and got that energy from the environment.
Yeah, yeah. And so I am, thanks for Justin for pulling up those images. So this is one of the pictures from the series Arrivé avant moi, devant moi. So this is not in the exhibition, but I wanted to bring it up and bring everyone's attention to it. It was produced as part of a C Magazine artist project originally. And so this piece, which I would like you to talk about a bit more, but for me, really was a flashpoint. And you mentioned the witch's kit, and so that was a discovery that was announced in 2019 from Pompeii, that they had found the remains of this. I think they called it a sorceress's kit or witch's kit, something like that, and that it was objects that were deemed to be part of a kit that would provide like protection and support to an unknown feminine community. And so I was kind of immediately drawn into this announcement, and I actually wrote to the the Pompeii researchers and asked them for if they could provide more information, and they sent me back an email in Italian, sort of very kindly saying no. It's very generous of them to take the time to refuse me. But that this kind of, I was like, okay, there's this, first of all, a community of women who are not known to us anymore, but that came together with one another to kind of like provide care. And there were like some of the amulets they understood to be kind of like fertility symbols or kind of protection charms, these sorts of things that would have been very kind of important and necessary in that kind of patriarchal community. And then the kind of inference of magic, referring to it as a sorceress's kit or a witch's kit. So I was sort of struck by this, and this was like in my heart. And then when we spoke about this project, I was like, my mind was sort of like leaking out of my ears. Like I was sort of like totally like enraptured. And I think this, maybe I'll hand it over to you to kind of share a little bit about this project.
Sure. So I had found out that Jean Duval was a partner to Baudelaire, French poet, and I was really drawn to her presence as a mixed-race woman who was involved within these French art communities. And it just really intrigued me. And as I started to learn more about her, I was learning more about her through other sources other than her narrative. And what's really important to me is that I'm very aware of spending time with these women. I'm not in any way attempting to tell their story, more than share space with them, and I don't know how to explain it, but to just be with and share with and give space to as well. And so these photographs document my collection of objects and images of Jean and Maud Salter. Maud Salter was a Scottish visual artist who was also looking into Jean's history and working with Jean in ways to create kind of an archive of documenting her presence. And so these photographs, they kind of highlight that for me. My attempt to develop a relationship with Jean, one where it's again very reciprocal. My attempt is not to ever take anything from her, but to just share with her if she's willing. Yeah.
And I think that kind of like community building across time is something that really resonated with me, and kind of circling back to the kit, I think this was kind of another instance of that, this sort of like spending time with women who have been erased from history, and sort of being a vessel or some kind of channel for them to reappear or to be known again in a really caring way. But there's also this thread that I think is a little bit more subversive or empowering, which is just the fact of like not reanimating, but reestablishing relation, and doing so in a way that is so mindful of the care that these women deserve.
It's also like reflective of the care that women continue to provide me, and I hope to be able to provide other women. I was having a conversation earlier this morning where I was talking about how my practice is where it's at right now because of the support of the female community that has really seen me and heard me and supported and trusted and taken, that risk in respecting my practice to help keep it afloat in that sense, like there's moments where maybe I might be not trusting myself, and I know very well that I can seek the support from many women out there who will help remind me. And so it's just an extension of that and lending it instead of, going towards emerging, I'm going into the past in a way and trying to continue that momentum.
Yeah, and how fundamental that is for racialized women working in the arts, like that this community that is able to come together and protect one another. Like I think like my original kind of question and statement about us and being able to build a relationship, I definitely feel that support as well, and so it's so affirming, because it doesn't always exist. Like it's not always around. So it's so kind of like so integral and important. And I think to kind of point again to Jean and some of the other women, I wanted to ask you about Gertrude.
Yes.
So I think we have a picture. It's I think the last one or the second to last one. Sorry, Justin. I hope I'm correct.
Sure, yeah, yes. So I started working with Gertrude in 2017.
This is Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein, yeah. I started working with Gertrude through a psychic medium. And the intention for that was because I was attempting to understand a play that she wrote, Objects Lie on a Table. And I thought, what better way to understand this play than to understand it through learning through Gertrude. And so in working with a psychic medium, I started to learn that the artist books that I was writing in response to Gertrude's play were also written in collaboration with Gertrude. And I was often really kind of shy and afraid to talk about that because I know that there are a lot of preconceived notions about that and what it could lend itself to being, not conventional, I guess is an easy way to put it. But after years of working with Gertrude, I started to learn that certain things weren't necessarily coincidence. There was purpose behind things. The image that you see are sculptures that I created with the Virgin Mary on the top. And Gertrude Stein starts her play Objects Lie on a Table with these nuns, and these nuns make these funny things. But we never find out what these things are, and this is my imagined version of what these nuns are creating with these spools of thread, things that are found in domestic spaces like in the kitchen or a living room.
Oh, I love that. I think thank you, you're setting me up for my next question very, very well. So kind of a phrase that kind of appeared to me a few times and appears in the show is the divine feminine. And when I'm thinking of the divine feminine, it's an experience of femininity that is incredibly powerful. So thinking of the sorceress's kit would be an instance of that. This sort of like something imbued with a kind of miraculous power, not necessarily associated with religion, or in the kind of like Judeo-Christian sense. Spirituality, and the way that femininity is sort of like, I think, associated with a lot of the threads that I'm interested in pulling at for this exhibition, sort of like embodied experience, emotionality, expanded consciousness, for lack of a better word, sort of non-rational, thought or experience. So I wondered, because it's such a rich term, if you could talk about your interest or connection with this language, and Mary, I think, would be maybe an instance.
I find it. I question the non-rational versus the rational. To me, believing in what my gut is telling me is quite rational. Because I'm actually giving myself the opportunity to listen to the knowledge that I not only have, but the knowledge that has come from generations of women in my family before me, helping to guide in some way. With the Virgin Mary, she was somebody, I am born Catholic, but not Catholic practicing. I have a fraught relationship with Catholicism, but I'm really quite interested in this image, this icon of Mary, who embodies to me grief and mourning and loss, but also a life in some way, who, I was doing a talk yesterday and was referring to the Jensen art history text and how I realized, except for like within Marian communities. But so the divine feminine to me is not just, it's more of an interiority. And I think it can actually be included in everyone. It's just a matter of people being aware. Consciousness.
Yeah, consciousness. I was
okay?
Yeah, I'm having two thoughts at once. Justin, do you mind flipping to some of the shots from the exhibition? And so I wanted to maybe take this opportunity to talk about compositions on a colorless blue.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wanted to speak more about that process of the use of negative space and the art history, the approach via the art history textbooks.
Sure. So I mentioned using the Jensen art history text to remove the Marys. These are the pages that the Marys were removed from. And what I did is kind of intervened with transparency and drawings on top of transparencies that were then overlapped and collaged over the cutouts as a way of creating a composition for a score that could then be interpreted individually and personally each one is almost created as a site of personal contemplation. And so in removing Mary, for me it was, that trope of removing makes something more visible, more present. And there's, many stories and histories of apparitions of the Virgin Mary, and in a way, in removing her, she becomes the specter that's still present. Very much like Jean, very much like Jean.
Yeah, Jean, who was literally erased, sort of Baudelaire's mother burning her letters, and
Gustave Courbet painting her out of a painting.
Yeah. And I also wanted to ask you, well, I have like a list now that's stacking up, but I think the color blue is something that between you and Tim, it's a reoccurring theme and a theme of the show that I tried to draw out a little bit. So I wondered if you might share a little bit about your relationship to the color blue.
Yeah, it's one that I haven't really been able to articulate yet. It started off with the relationship it had to the Virgin Mary's cloak that she would wear, and that blue that was often visible in representations of her. And very quickly, I realized how I'm enveloped in blue. The sky, I live close to a lake, so blue is everywhere. And it started to create an aura. And so, often with exhibitions, how the blue is in our exhibition downstairs. When creating exhibitions, I often incorporate color as a way of influencing the aura of that space, of the artwork in that space. And blue, for a while now, has been that color that I keep referring to or reverting to unintentionally too. I'm always thinking I need to veer for something different, but I keep coming back to blue. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I also wanted to ask you, and this is something that I feel like though I sort of talked about how we talk all the time, but I sort of new learning for me was also your relationship to Fluxus.
Yeah.
And so this is maybe also dwelling on the composition and the scores a little bit, but I think I really enjoyed talking to you about this when we kind of met on our own, and I was hoping you could share a little bit about that as well.
As a student, I was always so interested in the Fluxus movement, Dada. I was interested in performance and happenings, and I think what drew me to all of that work was that there was this spontaneity at times to it. There was room for interpretation and translation in the work that was being created through instruction and direction. There was also this huge, for me, sense of community and ability for people to interact with each other. The work came alive through that. And I love immersing myself in that history because it also felt like it was an inclusive space. For not just people who were visual artists, but poets, musicians, and I feel so much too that it was inclusive, gender, race, culture. There were so many different ways for people to become involved with that movement that it was so easily relatable. And so these compositions, my performance work, gestures, all kind of are grounded in the Fluxus movement, I think, for now.
Yeah, I think for me, I think hearing you share about that sort of spoke to the like dynamism of the work, because I had become so fixated on certain elements,
Right.
In terms of my own thinking around the divine feminine and even the kind of relationship to art history, which I'm sort of so enamored by. And then you kind of like opened up a window where I was like, oh, I really need to think about the kind of performative element or the prompts a little bit more. And so I don't know, for those who have seen the show, if they've used the prompts or if they've engaged with them, but I think they're really wonderful. It's I've seen lots of people sort of like dwelling very close to the work, like they get really up close and hopefully sampling the cards that they can take away that actually have the prompts on them. But I also wanted to ask you about, and sort of kind of following a track that I will connect, but another artist in the show, Tim Whiten, you two have a friendship and have been connected for many years. And so for those who aren't familiar with Tim, he was just awarded the Iskowitz Prize and will be sort of having a major exhibition at the AGO, which is the 4th iteration of a sort of like exhibition series that has been circulating in Ontario. So some really amazing, well-deserved recognition for this like stupendous artist. And he's such a warm and generous presence. And I was really moved by a recent public conversation you two had through McMaster. I had like rushed home from work to get like kind of like arrive at home so I could live stream it at like on time, and I was so flustered. And then you two were talking and I was like bawling in my kitchen. So this like really resonated with me, and I think it sort of helped me build this show. But one of the things that Tim spoke about was hoping that people experience the work without much of a like contrived intervention. And people are invited to take what they need, and that is sufficient for him. Which, as a curator, that was a really amazing challenge, because it's sort of like your job is to be an intermediary in a way. But I wondered if you wanted to just share some of your perspectives about this, either how it feels when you engage with Tim's work, or just thinking about kind of like questions of engagement, especially kind of like related to my question about Fluxus. I brought it back.
You want to talk more about Fluxus? I do feel a huge responsibility as an artist with the work that I create, but I'm never trying to manipulate the viewing of the work. It comes from a place of personal, most of the work that I create, but I'm always trying to think about how to make it accessible universally, so that others can relate to it based on their experiences, and bringing their life to it, and everybody's reading of it is going to be different, and I appreciate that so much, because I learned so much too when I hear others' interpretations of the work. I see things that I wasn't even aware of, that I realized that perhaps I was channeling when creating a work. With Tim's work, at first I didn't know much about his work when I first encountered it, but I felt it, and I really hope for people when they interact with my work that it's very similar. It's this feeling that you have, something that gets conjured within you, to connect with the work in some way. Oftentimes with Tim's work, what I find, it's more of like the aura of the work that one is being kind of grabbed by, and pulled in. And that's the thing, his work pulls you in, which is really quite a lovely experience to have as a viewer.
Yeah, I think the materiality of his work, sort of glass, wood, very like organic material, also like contributes to that, where they draw you towards them. And I think in observing people looking at his work and experiencing his work, it's so gratifying, because it's sort of like, oh yeah, you feel it too. especially Respite, which is the kind of footstone that's on the installed on the ground, and that one's just an absolute jewel. So I hope that if you haven't seen the show that you'll take some time, because I don't want to spoil it too much, but I think each of the individual works are so special, and I think as I said, this show was on my mind for a long time, and it was on my mind because I was kind of fresh out of school, and I was working at the Mackenzie in Regina, and I was watching the more senior curators in meetings sort of talk about their shows that they were doing, shows that were coming up, and making plans. And I was working as a curatorial assistant at the time, so I was much more in a contributing role than a kind of curating role. And one day we had a conversation in a meeting, like, what exactly is curating, which is a good thing to check in on, I guess, when you're working with curators. But it was sort of like, how does it work? Like, what do you do first? Is it the artwork, or is it the idea? Is it the curator that kind of has to like pull something out of their head, or does the work provide it? And so I was thinking, like, for me, I felt really compelled to actually figure it out, and because I was doing a lot of what I thought was just like impulsive, like I was like, oh, this artist and this artist, they should go together. And then it's like, well, why? And so that why like was like a gut feeling essentially, and then I was like, well, isn't that enough? And so I became really interested in the gut feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think like it brought me back to you, because I think our ongoing connection or relationship had been sort of based off of like I think we trusted each other right away, and mm-hmm. so there was already this kind of gut response to being able to work together, and so I was like, okay, I have an example in front of me of this, like, can I think about it? And so I began to sort of like think about language around intuition, and this show sort of I followed that thread to get to this show, and I think each of the artists in the exhibition sort of approach it differently. So it's also kind of a fascinating sort of like, lenses flipping in front of your eyes. Like each artist is sort of I was thinking about meditating on these ideas from a slightly different perspective. Tim, very much interested in kind of like conceptions of consciousness. Betty sort of like really leaning into the occult, and also I think is incredibly kind of like politically engaged, especially in the era of work that I'm showing of hers, sort of like post the Civil Rights Act in the United States, and she's an American artist, so also responding in a different way. But to bring it back to our conversation, I guess I just wanted to ask you sort of like what your relationship is with intuition, if you can kind of like articulate it in so many words.
No.
Okay, talk over.
I can't. It's such a hard thing to be able to articulate in words, and I wonder if we're supposed to.
Good question.
Part of me feels like the nature of intuition is one that is indescribable, and to put into words is just falling within the conventions that we are pushing so hard against. So I don't mean to be...
No. That's maybe the perfect answer.
But it's there and it's present, and I think we all have it. It's just we've been taught for so long not to attribute a weight to it, but I do want to ask you, have you kind of come to an answer as to the why that you were asking about, why these artists or why this arrangement?
Yeah, good question. The second half is Erika asking me questions. Yeah. I think to go back to that sort of like it is wordless. There are few ways to express that experience, and that therefore art being like kind of the perfect vehicle for that. And so like, of course this is why it's an exhibition and not a book or a speech or something else. And I think I perhaps haven't totally answered it for myself, which I think like Tim said something to me in one of our studio visits where he was like, this is possibly a quest that you'll be on for a long time. Which if you know him, like Erika's smiling. It's like very, I think very classic him. But I think I'm sort of coming to understand that, and so also understanding that exhibitions aren't necessarily terminal, so that like the ideas that are presented in an exhibition format don't sort of finish, and they're like, okay, we're done. Like, dust our hands off and go do the next thing. So I think getting to be more comfortable with that, and also getting to be more comfortable that what I'm doing is sort of like one form within curation or within thought, and that there are sort of people who are much more practiced at it, and so kind of inviting them into this conversation, such as yourself, Erika, and sort of understanding like that I am part of that lineage, I think, and that's even kind of extending back to Maud and Jean, and I was sort of I was speaking with a class yesterday, and I kind of joked like, oh, I don't want to like list everyone's ages, but you know, Betty is in her 90s, and so I think there is literally sort of a generational theme in this show, and that you know, there are these artists who have been working for like 50 years on this topic, and so also kind of paying homage to that, and realizing that I haven't chipped into anything new necessarily. I'm sort of bringing this conversation out and to the surface, and sort of, you know, it's an experiment.
Well, you're continuing to widen the space and allow for us to kind of peek through a bit more.
Yeah, let a little bit more light in or something like that.
Like curator as archivist.
Yeah.
Almost,
Yeah. Curator, which I suppose is partially our original like direction. Curation as carer. Yeah.
And that goes into the relationship too with artists, and caring for the work and caring for the space. You're also caring for the artists in that way as curators.
Yeah.
And that comes across loudly in exhibitions for sure.
Yeah.
And in the writing that gets done about the work too. That's also very important.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. We'll have to do some more of that. Yeah, I wonder, do we want to just go for questions? Are there questions in the audience? Either virtual audience and or physical, spiritual? We'll accept them all.
This is a note, I guess, for the physical audience. If you could bring your question up to the microphone, then the people who are joining over the internet can also hear it. So. If you're in the room and you come up to speak in this microphone, it's not going to amplify your voice, but it allows the people online to hear it. So yeah, if you could just bring your questions up here if you have them, that'd be great.
Come on down.
Sure.
Please.
Okay, so I am Shaitan,
Nice to meet you.
Seyaitan, and I have a question about how did you come across Jean as a person, really?
So a curator friend of mine, Emily McKibben, we were emailing each other, and it was just like a bit of a blurb in an email where she asked if I was aware of who Jean was. And I wasn't. And she described the Courbet painting, and then I dove into it pretty deeply and started doing some research and traveled to Paris to also try to locate her as well. Yes, so very lucky.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Serendipitous.
Yeah.
Any more cues? Virtual.
Oh, I'll give one a go.
Howdy.
Hi. One of the things that I was thinking about during your talk is kind of about mining the archive and the structure of the archive. So I used to work in archives and special collections, and I always thought that one of the nice things about archives is that they are really open-ended, and they're not like, they're more discursive spaces as opposed to like sort of hierarchical or kind of structured in a narrative way. But then also the way that like a traditional or a standard archive is organized, I think it almost it sort of lends itself well to doing research that is linear and kind of specific. And I just think that there's this intergenerational aspect to your exhibition, Lillian, but there's also in the ways that the artists, that I think maybe particularly your work and Betty's, like work with found objects or figures from history or collaborations with people who are deceased, like that there is this kind of pulling back into history. That's a really long question. How do you both feel about archives?
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, so like Saidiya Hartman talks about how, Black subjectivity can't be found in that, like it's not there, it's somewhere else. And so I think kind of in addition to exclusively Black subjectivity, like there are so many things that aren't kind of present in the kind of traditional archive. And so I think like the kind of archival work that might be like that we were kind of like touching on is sort of like the things that are outside. And so the sorceress's kit for me was something that is outside, because they didn't know if it was a highborn woman or a slave that owned it. Like there's just so much that wasn't known. And so kind of like regardless of that, being able to kind of like be in relation to those people. So I think like sort of like an archivist for like the kind of ephemeral that sort of wasn't filed originally or something. Like, I
love our personal archives, the ones that we have in our homes that become important to us, and that we choose to share, because then what it does is it also highlights for me all that's left out of publicly accessed archives, and what information is easily shared or gathered.
Yeah, we actually, Justin helped us run a workshop that was kind of along those lines, where we invited people to bring objects that they sort of had at home that weren't necessarily precious, like in terms of jewels or anything like that, but had sort of like this kind of inexplicable value. And we actually made a spirit catcher that we it was a really beautiful process, and it was sort of like a small group, but I was sort of like so emotionally exhausted from traveling and installing the show, and then I was completely blown away by the generosity of everyone who came and shared, and so it was this like kind of uncanny experience, but so along the lines of what you described, this kind of the personal archive, kind of what we collect and carry with us.
All our little collections, that we have at home.
Yeah, the seashells on the windowsill, and etc. Another question. Hello.
For artists who are starting their career, from your two different perspectives, what kind of advice would you give about, an artist starting to develop relationships with curators? How does that start? How does that happen for you, Erika? And then from your perspective, Lillian, how do you seek out new work? How do you, obviously via research, but, one-to-one, how do you end up meeting with artists that, that would be great.
For me, it's always been about being honest and coming from a place of genuine interest and care to get to know somebody. Because if I'm working with you, I'm giving you my life's practice to work with. That it's actually important to me, the relationship that we develop. It's something that I am very aware of and wanting to foster something that's healthy and that will grow. And so I really believe in just being yourself, in the sense that you are allowing yourself to be as raw and as vulnerable as possible with the people that you are working with in ways that are safe.
Yeah, I find this question tough to answer. When I was sort of learning about studio visits, which are sort of like the vehicle that are sort of most common, I think, for like initiating an artist-curator relationship, I was really intimidated, sort of going back to that like understanding of myself as like green, which I think is probably like gendered and raced. But what I would do is I would bring a gift. So when I'd meet with an artist, I would actually bring like, and just like, I don't have any money, so it's like just flowers or a beer or like some like 6-pack or some wine or chocolate or just like a croissant or something. And so it was meant to be like an opening sort of like reciprocal gesture. Just, you're offering me your time and your practice. And so like, it's nicer if if you have a show or something, so you're saying, oh, would you like to be in my show? But if you're just sort of making an acquaintance, like sort of offering something. So for me, that was like so I felt a little bit more comfortable, and then sort of like I'd be like, okay, I've got enough questions for an hour or something, or like 45 minutes. But I think like something I've spoken to a lot of students about recently is just like going to shows. I think like another important mentor for me, Kim Simon, she just, when I was doing my master's, she was like, just go to shows, just go. And I think that was really helpful because I started to have my own ideas when I was just experiencing work. And I think that was, very helpful. And then your confidence does eventually grow in terms of reaching out to make connections with artists, but also just sort of knowing about work, I think kind of already puts you in a really good position to kind of to have a conversation.
I think that goes for artists too. For the introvert, going to openings isn't quite my thing, but I am very much interested in seeing the work of my colleagues and my peers, and being able to then communicate through email or just casual conversation about what I've been able to experience. It's just building more resources, I guess, in my mind. Yeah.
And I think there's like a low boil, a simmer, like as I said, we've been connected for a few years now, and there's a number of artists where the relationship has extended over several years. So it's sort of like maybe we don't work together in the first, few months of our relationship, but hopefully, as you say, there's a trust relationship that builds where there is an opportunity, down the line, or just, something comes up and there is that trust. And I think also like, I did a talk recently with 2 other artists that I'm working with, and thinking about navigating institutions, I very much like see myself as like paired, or like kind of like I'm with the artist and we're doing it together. So like there's this kind of like, we have a mutual goal in mind of a successful, safe situation show. Hopefully that answers your question. Thumbs up. Any from our virtual friends?
Yeah, we have a few from Zoom. We have one from Barb Hunt. It says, Erika, what brought you to thinking about magic and intuition? What for you is the relationship between these? Love your work.
Thank you, Barb. I feel like magic is everywhere. And I feel like when you're open to it, you live a different kind of life. And I think since I was real little, I've been really blessed to have a mom who has supported me in every step of my practice and in my life to foster that inner knowledge. And, I'm weirdly getting a little emotional thinking about this. It's weird because it is just so beautiful. And we are surrounded by magic, and we are surrounded by things that we can't explain. And I just wish for us to embrace that a bit more so that we are more open to possibilities, a lot more open-minded. Thanks for the question, Barb.
All right, so we have another question for Erika from Heidi Eigenkind.
Heidi.
Yeah, I wonder if you, Erika, have read Black Venus's Tale by Angela Carter. Explores romantic notions of the muse, racism, colonialism, among other themes around the life of Jean Duval. It was published in 1980 by Villiers Publications Unlimited in England. I don't know if it's still in print.
I'm familiar with the book. I haven't read it. And I don't think it's still in print. But Lillian and I went on a hunt for a Maud Salter book, a catalog on Maud Salter's exhibition on Jean. So maybe that's our next
hunt.
Our next hunt. Thank you, Heidi.
Any other questions? Comments? One more?
No? Okay, well, maybe this is a really lovely place to wrap it up. Thank you so much both for your generous words. They made me feel emotional as well. And for just your beautiful work. And yeah, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the performance of Shadows and spend some time with it, it's a really beautiful and contemplative exhibition. And I hope you do. And thank you so much both.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Recording stopped.